Atlanta, June 15th, 2026. The final whistle just blew. A 40-year-old man is lying face down on the grass. Not injured, not cramping. He's crying. And not the kind of crying you fake for the cameras. He just held Spain, the reigning European champions, scoreless for 90 minutes. 7 saves, 23 attempts, 0 goals. And here's what nobody in that stadium knew. 3 weeks before this moment, this man had no contract, no club, no guarantee he'd ever play professional soccer again. His market value listed at 50,000 euros. In modern football, that's not a number. That's almost nothing. But there's something else, something stranger, something that started long before this World Cup, before his career, before he ever touched a soccer ball. It started with a name. A name born on a tiny island in the middle of the Atlantic. Born from a little boy running home, head down, after losing a street game. The other kids laughed at him for it. 40 years later, the whole world was saying that name.
Hey, I'm Leo, and this is Footy Leo, where we dig into the stories that live underneath the scoreboard. The ones that don't fit in a highlight reel. The ones that take 40 years to make sense. And this one might be the best story to come out of this entire World Cup. Let's go back to the beginning. São Vicente, a small island in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, part of an archipelago called Cabo Verde, 10 volcanic islands, roughly 500,000 people, and a culture built more around fishing than football. In the city of Mindelo, in the late 1980s, a boy named Josimar spent his afternoons doing what every kid in that neighborhood did, playing soccer in the street. His mother worked. His father was doing military service. The ones who raised him day to day were his grandparents, Maria Signorina and Manuel da Luz. And little Josimar was competitive, intensely, almost irrationally competitive.
He played against older kids, bigger kids, rougher kids. He took hits. He argued. He refused to back down. But sometimes the game would get to him. The frustration would build past the point he could handle. And when that happened, when the anger was bigger than he was, he'd turn around and run, sprint, straight home, straight to his grandparents. The other kids noticed. They started laughing. In Portuguese, grandmother is avó. Grandmother, the loving, softer, diminutive version, is Vozinha. So that became the joke. Josimar runs to his Vozinha. The nickname stuck, sharpened into something simple. Vozinha. What none of those kids could have imagined, what nobody could have imagined, is that decades later, that same word would be printed on headlines across the planet. That a name born as mockery on a dusty street in Mindelo would one day be chanted, whispered, and typed by millions of people who had never heard of Cabo Verde before. But the name is only half the story. Because Josimar wasn't just born in Cabo Verde. He was named after something. Named after a moment that happened exactly 40 years before the one we're talking about. And when you understand that part, everything else clicks into place. Mexico City, June 1986. Josimar's father is watching the World Cup, and he is completely obsessed. Not just with the tournament, with one player in particular. A tall Argentine forward who moved like he had all the time in the world, who scored in the semifinals, who lifted the trophy alongside the greatest player who ever lived, Jorge Valdano.
When Josimar was born, his father had already made the decision. This boy would carry that name, Jorge Valdano, a tribute to that World Cup, to that moment, to everything it represented. There was just one problem. Cabo Verde has strict regulations about what names can be officially registered, and Jorge Valdano, a full foreign name, was rejected. So the father went back to that same World Cup, same tournament, same summer, and found another name, a Brazilian left-back who had become one of the quiet heroes of Mexico '86, a player known for his powerful runs and 2 unforgettable goals. His name was Josimar, and that's what went on the birth certificate. Think about that for a second. A father in a tiny Atlantic island watching a World Cup in 1986 names his son after a Brazilian player because his first choice, an Argentine, was blocked by bureaucracy.
That son grows up,
becomes a goalkeeper, spends decades in obscurity across Angola, Moldova, Cyprus, Slovakia, Portugal, and then shows up at the 2026 World Cup, 40 years after Mexico 86, and stops Spain cold. The circle doesn't close like that by accident. Or maybe it does. Maybe that's exactly what makes it feel like something more. But here's the part that nobody expected, not even Vozinha. A few days before the match against Spain, FIFA tracked down Jorge Valdano himself, the real one, the Argentine, the man Vozinha's father originally wanted to honor. They told him the story. Valdano's response was immediate, stunned, and then something close to pride. He said 40 years after playing in that World Cup, he was playing in this one too. Through Vozinha, by name, by bloodline of inspiration, he sent a message. Said he couldn't be more proud, sent his embrace to Vozinha, to his father, to everyone connected to the story. One message, 2 World Cups, 40 years apart, and a name that was almost never chosen.
Now here's what the cameras don't show you. The path from Mindelo to Atlanta wasn't a straight line. It wasn't a highlight reel. It wasn't the kind of career that gets documented or celebrated while it's happening. It was something quieter than that, and harder. Vozinha started as a field player. Quick feet, street instincts, the kind of natural feel for the game you only get from years of playing on asphalt against people older than you. But at 16, his body changed. He grew fast, and someone looked at him and said, "You're a goalkeeper now." He debuted in 2007 with Batuque FC, a club on his home island. No spotlight, no scouts, no one watching from the outside. Then Mindelense. Same island, same quiet. Then Angola. Then back to Europe. Moldova, Cyprus, Slovakia, Portugal. Club after club in leagues that most of the world never watches. Gil Vicente, Chavez. Names that mean something locally and almost nothing globally. No fame, no recognition, no moment where the world stopped and paid attention. Just years. Repetition. The unglamorous, invisible work of a goalkeeper who kept showing up.
And at every stop, something interesting happened. When he arrived in Angola early in his career, he tried to leave the nickname behind. Wanted to introduce himself simply as Josimar. Start fresh. New country, new chapter. But there was already another goalkeeper at the club with that name. So Vozinha stayed Vozinha. The identity born as a joke on a street in Mindelo followed him across 3 continents and refused to let go. By the time 2026 arrived, he was 40 years old. His contract with Chavez, a second division club in Portugal, was expiring on June 30th. No renewal confirmed, no other club lined up. His market value sitting at 50,000 euros in a sport where teenagers get sold for 50 million. The math was brutal and simple. Football was running out of road for him.
And then Cabo Verde qualified for their first World Cup in history, and Vozinha got the call, not as a backup, as the starter, as the man standing between the post and the world. Their first match? Spain, the reigning European champions. Lamine Yamal, Pedri, Rodri, Dani Olmo, a squad valued at over €1 billion, against a goalkeeper who wasn't sure he'd have a job in 2 weeks. June 15, 2026, Mercedes-Benz Stadium, Atlanta. 60-something thousand people inside, millions watching from every corner of the world. And somewhere in the stands, Cabo Verdean flags, a handful of them. Outnumbered? Loud anyway. From the first whistle, Spain does what Spain does. They possess the ball like it belongs to them. Slow it down, speed it up, move it side to side until a gap opens. Pedri threading passes between lines, Ferran Torres probing the right channel, Gavi pushing forward on his first World Cup start. The kind of football that makes you feel like the other team isn't even on the pitch.
Cabo Verde sits deep, compact, organized. They don't try to match Spain technically. They couldn't. Instead, they do something harder. They stay disciplined when discipline is the last thing your body wants to maintain. They defend with concentration and with something you can't coach. They defend like the moment matters. And at the center of all of it, Vozinha. 40 years old, gloves on, eyes tracking every movement in front of him. Reading the game the way only someone with 2 decades of experience can read it. Not the sharpest reflexes in the tournament, not the most decorated keeper on the field, but something else. Present. completely, absolutely present. First save, then another, a low drive that he smothers cleanly, a header he tips over the bar, a one-on-one he somehow closes down before the shot even comes. Each intervention met by a roar from the Cabo Verdean supporters, and a few seconds of stunned silence from everyone else.
Spain pushes in the second half. Luis de la Fuente sends on Mikel Merino. Then Lamine Yamal, the 18-year-old who has been terrorizing defenses across Europe, the player everyone assumed would eventually break this game open. He doesn't. Dani Olmo tries. Doesn't. 7 decisive interventions in total, 23 attempts, 0 goals. And with every minute that passed without a Spanish goal, something started shifting in that stadium. You could feel it. The slow realization that what was happening wasn't a fluke, wasn't luck, was a 40-year-old man simply refusing to let Spain through. The crossbar helped once. The defensive line held more than once. But Vozinha was the wall. The clock hit 90. The referee added 5 minutes. Spain pressed one last time.
Still nothing. The whistle blew. When the final whistle blew, Vozinha didn't run, didn't jump, didn't sprint toward his teammates with his arms wide open. He fell straight down onto the grass, face first. And he stayed there. His teammates came to him, piled on top of him. The Cabo Verdean bench emptied. And somewhere in the middle of that pile, a 40-year-old man was crying in a way that had nothing to do with soccer anymore.
Minutes later, they handed him the Man of the Match award. He stood in front of the cameras, still wearing his goalkeeper kit, still catching his breath, holding the trophy with both hands like he wasn't quite sure it was real. He said, "I have dreamed my whole life for this moment. I have worked my whole life for these games." Simple words, the kind of words that sound like cliches until you know what they cost. Because here's what Vozinha was thinking about in that moment. And it wasn't Spain, it wasn't the saves, it wasn't the scoreline or the headlines that were already being written across the world. He was thinking about Maria Signorina and Manuel da Luz, his grandparents, the ones who raised him while his parents worked, the ones he ran to after losing street games in Mindelo, the ones who were there before the nickname, before the career, before any of this. They were gone. They didn't get to see Atlanta.
And Vozinha, lying face down on that grass, was running to them anyway. The same way he always did. The same direction. Just without the road. His coach said it plainly. Those were tears of resilience. But resilience is just the technical word for what happens when someone carries something heavy for a very long time and doesn't put it down. Vozinha carried his grandparents for 40 years. Carried a nickname that started as a wound, carried a career that took him through countries and leagues no one followed, through contracts that expired, through a market value that said the world was done with him. And then the world called his name in Atlanta.
In the hours after the match, his Instagram went from 31,000 followers to millions. Interview requests, messages from strangers, his face on front pages in countries he'd never visited. The boy who ran home to his Vozinha had become one. Not just a goalkeeper, not just a story, something rarer than both. A reminder, quiet and undeniable, that some things take exactly as long as they need to take, and not a single minute less. If you've made it here, to this point in the video with me, I want to ask you something. Hit subscribe right now, because this is what we do here at Footy Leo every single day. We find the stories that don't make the main broadcast, the ones buried underneath the scoreline, the ones that actually matter. And if Vozinha's story hit something in you, I already know you're exactly who this channel is for. Drop a comment too. Tell me what got you. Was it the name, the grandparents, the fact that he almost didn't make it here at all? I read everything.
Now, back to something that hasn't been said yet, because Cabo Verde's story doesn't end in Atlanta. That 0-0 against Spain wasn't just a result, it was a statement. From a country of 500,000 people. From a federation that recruited players using LinkedIn. Yes, LinkedIn. Reaching out to anyone with Cabo Verdean roots scattered across the world. From a group of men who play in leagues most football fans have never heard of, and who showed up to their first ever World Cup and refused to be embarrassed. Their president called it the greatest thing to happen to the country since independence. Think about the weight of that sentence. Not a goal, not a trophy,
A draw against Spain in a World Cup debut. And Vozinha was the reason that draw existed. 50,000 euros market value, contract expiring in 15 days, a career spent in the shadows of professional football. Angola, Moldova, Cyprus, Slovakia, second division Portugal.
Places where you either love the game purely or you stop playing. Vozinha loved it purely. That's the only explanation that makes sense. Because nobody grinds through 2 decades of invisible football for the money. Nobody keeps showing up in leagues the world ignores for the recognition. You do that because when the whistle blows and the ball moves, something in you goes quiet, in a good way. Something in you is home. And on June 15th in Atlanta, that home had 60,000 witnesses.
Here's what the whole story is actually about. Not the saves, not the scoreline, not even the World Cup. It's about a father in Cape Verde in 1986, watching a tournament on television, so moved by what he saw that he decided his son would carry that feeling forward. In a name, in an identity, in something invisible that travels through time. It's about a bureaucratic rejection that changed everything. Because if Jorge Vardano had been approved, there is no Josimar. No connection to that Brazilian left back. No thread running from Mexico 86 to Atlanta 2026. The name that was chosen second became the one that mattered most. And then there's the other name, the one nobody chose, the one that arrived on its own. Vozinha. Born on a street, born from losing, born from a boy who didn't know yet that running home wasn't weakness, that the people waiting for him there were the whole point. 40 years later, Jorge Valdano, the man who almost gave his name to this story, watched it from the outside and said something simple, something that closed a circle no one had planned to open. He said he was playing in this World Cup too, through Vozinha. 40 years, 2 World Cups, one name that was rejected, one name born as a joke, and one man who carried all of it across 3 continents and 2 decades of invisible work and showed up in Atlanta at 40 years old with an expiring contract and stopped Spain from scoring a single goal.
Maria Signorini and Manuel de Luz didn't see it, but I think they know. If this story stayed with you, share it. Send it to 3 people who need to hear it today. Not because it's about soccer, because it's about what happens when you don't put the weight down. Subscribe to Footy Leo if you aren't already. We're here every day looking for exactly this, the story underneath the story. And leave me a comment, a real one. Tell me what you want us to find next. Because somewhere out there, there's another Vozinha. And we're gonna find them.